Now, leaders of the G7 and guest nations are now in the third and final day of the 2021 G7 in the beachside resort town of Cornwall, England. Over the last couple of days, the leaders of some of the world's most advanced economies have gathered to discuss coronavirus, the global economic recovery, China, and other key topics. Phil Crowther of AP International joins us live from Cornwall. Now, Philip, key issues in the summit's final plenary sessions today will be climate and the economy. What are some of the key factors that we should be on the lookout for?
Well, look, it's going to be easier for the group of 7 nations here to discuss climate change than it was during the last 4 years. That is simply because of the absence of former U.S. President Donald Trump. He put a spanner in the works of any climate discussions, and that, of course, changes with President Joe Biden. He very much wants climate change, the fight against climate change, to be one of the key ingredients of the conclusions that this G7 summit will come up with. Of course, that's not enough. There are going to have to be details, a concrete plan ahead, especially moving into the next climate summit that is going to be taking place in Glasgow later this month, also hosted, of course, by UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson. Expect all of these countries to say that they will increase efforts to combat climate change. Whether there will be concrete promises, we will have to wait and see. Now, you mentioned the economy as well. We are firmly expecting these world leaders to okay the agreement that finance ministers of these G7 countries came up with recently, and that is the 15% minimum tax on large multinational corporations. They will agree on this. That doesn't necessarily mean that it will become a reality, because each country, of course, has to go back to their respective parliaments in most cases and get their agreement as well.
Now, the leaders will issue a joint communique at the conclusion of this summit not long from now. And for the next few weeks, the world will be deciphering the statement on what it includes and what it does not include. What deliverables do we expect from the joint communique?
Here are the keys to look out for. First of all, we started this summit, remember, with the pledge from the United States of 500 million COVID-19 vaccines that would be distributed to lower income countries and through the African Union. Then there were further pledges from G7 nations. What I think the whole world wants to see in the final statement coming out of Cornwall here is a very, very clear promise of, we expect, 1 billion doses that will be pledged from these countries to be delivered around the world. That, of course, according to the World Health Organization, is not enough. It believes that there have to be 11 billion doses available to get 70% of the world population vaccinated. So in that communique, you're absolutely right, we'll be poring over that for quite a few days still. Will there be actual details, an actual concrete plan for vaccine distribution? We'll have to wait and see on that front. I would also mention China here when it comes to the final text that will be published by the G7. Will, for example, China be mentioned by name, and will its re-education camps for Uyghur Muslims be mentioned? The Biden administration wants that to absolutely be the case, for there to be a clear criticism of forced labor in China. It's not clear whether countries like Germany really want that to happen because of their close trade relationship with China. And finally, I would mention that the United States again wants a very clear commitment from the other 6 countries in the G7 group for an alternative to China's Belt and Road Initiative. This would be a big Western-financed infrastructure plan that would get its influence into those countries where China is trying to do exactly that at the same time.
Right, and there have been disagreements among the leaders of the G7 we've been hearing. Now, President Joe Biden is reported to have extended his support to the Japanese Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga for hosting the 2020 Tokyo Olympics amidst the raging COVID pandemic, and so has the UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson. Of course, that was delayed to this year. What's the general feeling among leaders there at the G7 summit? There have been talks that the Japanese PM has been pushing to have that endorsement included in the joint statement as well.
Yeah, you're absolutely right to mention this. We got that statement from the White House about that bilateral meeting on the sidelines of the G7 summit between the United States and Japan. And the statement from the White House, I will just read that out to you because it is pretty crucial when it comes to whether the Tokyo Olympics, as we firmly believe, will take place or not. Here is what the White House says. President Biden affirmed his support for the Tokyo Olympics moving forward with all public health measures necessary to protect athletes, staff and spectators. He then went on to praise and show his pride in U.S. athletes. Of course, there is a little bit of pressure from Japan, not just from the Prime Minister Suga, but also from the organizing committee, and that comes from Seiko Hashimoto. He's the president of the organizing committee. He says he would be grateful if the G7 countries in their final statement would come up with their support for the Tokyo Olympics going forward. I think there's a pretty high chance of the G7 countries simply saying something like they are looking forward to the Olympics. But there is a little bit of dealing going on behind the scenes on behalf of Japan, lobbying the other countries in this G7 group.
All right, Philip Crowther of AP International live for us from Cornwall, England. Great job as always. Thank you, Philip.